My presentation will be on the work of Claes Oldenburg. He was born in Sweden in 1922 and his family moved to the US in 1936. He studied art at Yale University and the Art Institute of Chicago. He grew tired of Chicago's art scene and moved to New York City in the mid-1950s. He found there that he did not love the expensive lifestyle of Fifth Avenue, but deeply admired the street culture of Manhattan's Lower East Side. This admiration would provide much inspiration for his future works. Oldenburg focused on everyday objects and the theme of consumerism. This connected him to the pop movement in New York with other artists like Andy Warhol. This first work or installation is called The Store. He created this and debuted it in 1961, and it's kind of what created a name for him in the pop art movement. He essentially turned an abandoned warehouse into an art gallery that was set up to look just like a typical American store. It displayed clothing and common household items like food that were all made of plaster. Through these everyday items, he was questioning society, consumerism, and our relationship with both. All of these objects were made using very cheap materials, kind of having this idea of cheap stores and cheap goods that Americans consume and take. And he was seeking to copy just an ordinary, cheap American store. While all of these objects are very familiar, they bring a somewhat uneasy feeling because of sometimes their unnatural size, but often the texture and material they're made from. He had an interest in criticizing capitalist society and kind of just giving it this uneasy feeling and making you question it using the materials that he did. This was a successful installation that led to the Store 2 in 1962, and instead of using plaster this time, he chose a different material that was more malleable, a malleable fabric, to create even more oversized food items. These were very large scale, more large scale than before, and sewn together so that they folded in on themselves and sagged, kind of furthering that uneasy feeling and criticizing consumerism and making you question what you're looking at and what you typically consume. We're now going to move on to his monuments. These were kind of a big deal. When he married his second wife, Kusi van Brugge, in 1977, they collaborated on a lot of works. He did monuments before without her, but they, once they got married, they did a lot of works together. And like the installations he created, these monuments were made to depict everyday objects. But he then magnified them to enormous sizes that almost felt threatening, kind of furthering his point of consumerism and capitalism. He himself stated that the only rule of his work is that it shouldn't have any function, being a pure form. He was interested in looking at objects as they were, and by enlarging them to this enormous size, he was urging the viewer to look more closely at these objects that they have grown so used to and kind of just don't think about. Lipstick is kind of the beginning of him making sculptures out of metal on a large scale outdoors. This was one that was commissioned by graduate students at Yale University, and as you can see, it kind of just is part of his theme of consumerism. It's a product that is very enlarged, has interesting color, but not super unrealistic color, and just metal. It's very shiny, and the scale is just very large, and it's having the viewer look at it and question what this is and how it relates to them. Clothespin is his first sculpture in an urban situation. It went through a number of changes before it was finally made, but at the end of the day, he says that this object was reduced to its absolute essentials, and that it is an idea of a clothespin rather than a clothespin itself. It is totally deprived of its function. The new function is to be an artistic object, the one that has now become. That was a big deal for him, was function and how function changes for these things that he's creating. Initially, right, a lipstick, the function is to wear and make you pretty or make you feel good. But when he makes it into a sculpture, the function turns to now becoming art. Spoonbridge is one of my favorites. I first learned about this one years ago, and it introduced me to his work. For a long time, he wanted to use a spoon and make it a monument and could never figure it out. His wife said the problem was he didn't have anything in the spoon. And so he put a cherry in the spoon and it just turned into what he wanted it to be. This whole sculpture wasn't meant to take too much attention because it was within a sculpture garden with other works. And so they made it fairly horizontal. This is also a fountain. The water comes out of the cherry stem and it kind of just trickles down onto the cherry, around the cherry, and then puddles in the spoon. Which is very interesting because it adds even more texture and interest to the cherry, making it look more realistic as to what a cherry actually looks like, more colorful and shiny, and gives it that texture that what a cherry looks like. Just some final thoughts on him. He really focuses on scale. Scale helps further his point of making the viewer look at these items and question what they are and how they relate to the artist to the viewer in their life. He uses color, typically realistic color, but it draws the viewer in. It's very interesting and creates balance and I think interest to the pieces. And texture, obviously, with the malleable pieces and the plaster food pieces in the beginning. Just kind of gives an uneasy feeling, that feeling he's looking for, to make the viewer question and wonder what's going on and why do I feel uneasy. As well as in his large monuments, it gives just an added, like with the cherry, and it looks shiny and it just looks more realistic. I think he does that really well. Thank you.